Workplace violence and harassment. Workplace violence, Policy 417. It is the policy of the Upper Grand District School Board to promote a learning and working environment in which all individuals treat each other with respect and dignity, and that is free from workplace violence, sexual violence, and domestic violence occurring in the workplace. Workplace violence erodes the trust and confidence that are essential to an individual's well-being. The Board also believes in the prevention of workplace violence and promotes a violence-free workplace. The Board is committed to developing and maintaining a program to implement this policy and to meeting the requirements. This policy applies to all UGDSB employees and describes the requirements of the Violence in the Workplace program. This policy applies to all activities that occur while on UGDSB premises or while engaging in work-related activities. As defined by the Occupational Health and Safety Act, workplace violence is the exercise of physical force by a person against a worker in a workplace that causes or could cause physical injury to the worker. An attempt to exercise physical force against a worker in a workplace that could cause physical injury to a worker, or a statement or behavior that is reasonable for a worker to interpret as a threat to exercise physical force against a worker in a workplace that could cause physical injury to a worker. Additional workplace violence definitions. Sexual violence. Any sexual act or act targeting a person's sexuality, gender identity, or gender expression. Whether the act is physical or psychological in nature that is committed, threatened, or attempted against a person without the person's consent and includes sexual assault, sexual harassment, stalking, indecent exposure, voyeurism, and sexual exploitation. Domestic violence, a pattern of behavior used by one person to gain power and control over another with whom he or she has or has had an intimate relationship with. It may include physical violence, sexual, emotional, and psychological intimidation, verbal abuse, stalking, and use of electronic devices to harass and control. Bullying takes on different forms and contexts with age. It can be physical, verbal, social, or emotional, or through the use of technology. Bystanders contribute to bullying by doing nothing to prevent it, or by becoming actively involved in supporting it. Gender identity, one's sense of oneself as male, female, or transgender. When one's gender identity and biological sex are not congruent, the individual may identify as transsexual or as another transgender category. Gender expression, the way in which a person acts to communicate gender within a given culture. For example, in terms of clothing, communication, patterns, and interests. A person's gender expression may or may not reflect his or her gender identity. External investigator, an impartial person possessing such knowledge, experience, or qualifications to conduct an investigation. Responding to violent incidents. All employees shall promptly report all incidents of workplace violence, including threats, to the principal, supervisor, and/or health and safety department using the online employee incident accident reporting system. If the principal or supervisor is a party to the violent incident, the employee shall inform the appropriate senior administrator. Investigations. The principal, supervisor, or designated external investigator shall ensure a thorough investigation of all complaints and allegations is conducted. If the principal, supervisor, is party to the violent incident, the investigation may be conducted by the appropriate senior administrator or designated external investigator. Domestic violence. The Board shall take every precaution reasonable in the circumstances for the protection of its employees if it becomes aware or ought reasonably to be aware of domestic violence that would likely expose a worker to physical injury that may occur in the workplace. Employees who have information that they or a fellow employee is subject to domestic violence that may expose them or their fellow workers to physical injury in the workplace have a duty to inform their supervisor. Where the supervisor may be party to the domestic violence, the employee shall inform the appropriate senior administrator. The supervisor or senior administrator shall treat all such reports as restricted information and only disclose to human resources or others who need to know information that is necessary for the protections of workers in the workplace. Where necessary, an employee safety plan shall be developed and implemented. The role of the Joint Health and Safety Committee. The Joint Health and Safety Committee shall receive information on the board's violence and harassment training program, be advised of the results of the board's workplace violent risk assessments, and receive reports of all incidents of workplace violence that result in a person being disabled from performing his or her usual work or requiring medical attention within 4 working days of the occurrence of the incident, and participate in a work refusal investigation. Summoning immediate assistance. Depending on the nature, location, and level of risk, an employee may seek assistance from the site supervisor, including the principal or vice principal, from members of the site's emergency response team, by calling 911, by using various communication devices, school-wide PA systems, classroom phones, individual cell phones, or two-way radios. The method of summoning immediate assistance for each board site shall be included in the site's emergency response plan or other appropriate document, for example, a safety plan. Work refusals. Employees have the right to refuse to work if workplace violence is likely to endanger them. A teacher cannot refuse to work where the circumstances are such that the life, health, or safety of a pupil is in immediate jeopardy. An employee shall report the circumstances of the work refusal to his or her principal or supervisor if he or she is refusing to work. The work refusal will be investigated forthwith by principal supervisor, health and safety department, worker refusing work, and worker member of the Joint Health and Safety Committee. Notification of risk of workplace violence. The Upper Grand District School Board is required to provide information to a worker, including personal information related to a risk of workplace violence from a person with a history of violent behavior, if the worker can be expected to encounter that person in the course of his or her work, and the risk of workplace violence is likely to expose the worker to a physical injury. This memo can be found on UG Share. Please take a moment to read through it. Workplace Harassment, Policy 408. It is the policy of the Upper Grand District School Board to promote a learning and working environment in which all individuals treat each other with respect and dignity and that is free from workplace harassment. Workplace harassment erodes the individual's dignity and self-esteem. The Board refuses to tolerate any behavior that constitutes workplace harassment. All incidents and complaints of workplace harassment must be reported by employees and will be investigated and dealt with by the Board. This policy applies to all UGDSB employees and describes the requirements of the Harassment in the Workplace program. This policy applies to all activities that occur while on UGDSB premises or while engaging in work-related activities. Workplace Sexual Harassment Definition. The OHSA's definition of workplace harassment has been expanded to include workplace sexual harassment, which is defined as engaging in a course of facetious comment or conduct against a worker in a workplace because of sex, sexual orientation, gender identity, or gender expression, where the course of comment or conduct is known or ought reasonably to be known to be unwelcome, or making a sexual solicitation or advance where the person making the solicitation or advance is in a position to confer, grant, or deny a benefit or advancement to the worker, and the person knows or ought reasonably to know that the solicitation or advance is unwelcome. Workplace sexual harassment includes, but is not limited to, a reprisal or threat of reprisal for the rejection of a sexual solicitation, or advance where the reprisal is made or threatened by a person in a position to grant, confer, or deny a benefit or advantage to the person. Sexual jokes when they are clearly offensive or degrading. The display and or distribution, especially by an electronic medium, of sexually offensive or degrading material, derogatory remarks directed towards members of one sex or sexual orientation, sexually offensive or degrading words, suggestive comments, obscene comments or gestures, derogatory remarks directed towards members of one sex or sexual orientation, unwelcome sexual flirtations, leering, advances, propositions, gifts, or requests for sexual favors, unwanted touching, verbal abuse or threats of sexual nature, and sexual assault. Racial ethnocultural harassment. Such workplace harassment involves any action that ridicules, degrades, or expresses hatred or undue attention based on race, ethnic group, skin color, language, dress, or religion. It includes but is not limited to the following: demeaning comments, unwelcome remarks, jokes, innuendos, or taunting about a person's group, race, ancestry, place of origin, color, ethnic origin, citizenship, or creed. The display and/or distribution, especially by any electronic medium, of racist, derogatory, or offensive pictures or materials. The production and distribution of hate literature using any media form, including the electronic media. Exclusion because of one's racial, ethnic, or religious backgrounds. Slurs and remarks about a group meant to demean and degrade that group in the presence of an individual, who may not necessarily be a member of the group mentioned, that create a poisoned environment. Threats, abuse, or assault. General rights and responsibilities. A party to a complaint has the right to be heard in an unbiased manner and to be taken seriously. Confidentiality to the extent possible. Know the names of the individual parties to the complaint and the appointed investigator. A complainant also has the right to seek assistance and support, have the allegation taken seriously, and to be assured that all efforts will be made to investigate the allegation in a fair and expedient manner. Be informed of decisions to the extent possible that appropriate corrective action has been taken, protection from reprisal or threat of reprisal. A respondent also has the right to seek assistance and support, respond to the allegations, know the identity of the complainant, know the details of the complaint, protection from being prejudged. Allegations of workplace harassment. Employees by employees. An employee who feels that he or she has been the subject of workplace harassment should do the following: tell the harasser that his or her behavior is unwelcome and to stop. Keep records of incidents in as much detail as possible. Record dates, times, locations, possible witnesses, what happened, and your reaction in as much detail as possible. It is not necessary to have a record of events to file a complaint, but it can help to remember details. If the behavior does not stop immediately, the individual does not feel comfortable approaching the alleged harasser, or the behavior was of such nature that it caused the individual ongoing discomfort, the individual should contact one of the following, who will attempt to resolve the issue or advise the individual of their right to file a formal complaint: a principal or supervisor, a supervisor's supervisor, a union or association representative, a superintendent or senior administrator, the director of education if the concern involves a superintendent or a senior administrator. To lodge a formal complaint, the complainant sends a written and signed complaint form to the Executive Officer of Human Resources, identifying the nature of the workplace harassment and other particulars. The Executive Officer determines whether the complaint falls within this policy, and if so, ensures that a copy of the complaint is sent to the respondent. The respondent shall have 10 working days to provide a written letter of response to the complaint. Allegations of workplace harassment. Employees by students. Note: all information obtained and actions taken must be documented in writing. Employees who believe a student has harassed them should report the incident to the principal or immediate supervisor, who will then report the incident to the principal. Upon receiving a formal complaint, the principal shall conduct an immediate investigation into the incident. Allegations of harassment. Employees by others. Note: all information obtained and actions taken must be documented in writing. If an employee feels that he or she has been the subject of workplace harassment by someone other than an employee or student, he or she should report by contacting a principal, manager, superintendent, or union association representative, who shall advise the employee's immediate supervisor. To attempt to resolve the situation, when the immediate supervisor is informed of the situation, he or she will obtain details of the incident. In some circumstances, it may be prudent to attempt to conduct an investigation of the complaint, to the extent possible, given the nature of the relationship between the alleged harasser and the board. Allegations of harassment student by staff members. All information obtained and actions taken must be documented in writing. It is the responsibility of the principal or vice principal to investigate all student complaints of workplace harassment by staff. The student should be aware that the term staff member includes but is not limited to teachers, guidance counselors, coaching staff, principals and vice principals, custodians, and secretaries. Workplace harassment may involve an abuse of power if the student is coerced into granting favors to the staff member. Coercion may be evidenced by actions such as threats of receiving a low mark or a failing mark, or in the form of a promise of a reward, special favor, or receiving an unearned passing grade or higher mark. Harassment may be persistent and ongoing, inappropriate comments, gestures, or touching. Please visit UG Share to view a comprehensive overview of the policies and procedures listed in this training session. Harassment in the Workplace Policy 408 and Violence in the Workplace Policy 417.